Welcome back to Metropole TV, the first 24-hour news and business channel here in Kenya and East Africa. This is The Smart Investor. My name is Aly Khan Satchu. I'm your host, and we've got a tremendous guest here, Siddharth Chatterjee. Siddharth.
That's right.
The United Nations Resident Coordinator. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I often see you sprinting around Nairobi, and I feel so guilty. 22 kilometers yesterday.
Yes.
Ex-paratrooper, been up, what is that place in Kashmir?
The Kargil and
the Kargil and everything. So really a great pleasure and nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's just start first of all with things that have been going on in the world, things that have caught your attention. I've seen that the UN Secretary General Guterres is fully invested in this whole climate change thing. We've seen big hits, Mozambique. Shall we start there? Because sure. That seems to me like a call to action is required. Are we getting it?
So the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has actually made a clarion call to action. It's a desperate call to the issue of climate change. And as you can see, he's right now in New Zealand making that call loudly and very clearly. You know, the Secretary General has pushed perhaps one of the boldest UN reforms that has ever been attempted. And him, together with his deputy, Amina Mohammed, are doing an absolutely spectacular job. What they're doing through this reform process is to make sure that we are responsive to the global challenges and threats that we face, which includes the challenge of climate change, the challenge of poverty, the challenge of hunger. All these are interconnected. But above all, what he's trying to also do is make sure that the UN system is fit for purpose, to be able to respond to the needs, to the vision, to the ideas, and to the development plans of a country. And that is why he's revamped the whole UN system. And he said something very remarkable some time back. He says, the world is in pieces and we need world peace. Oh. And it essentially means that he wants to push the agenda of prevention, whether it's the prevention of conflict, it's the prevention of violent extremism, it's the prevention of environmental degradation, it is the preservation of our planet, and which means the preservation of humanity.
And is the UN the lead, plays the lead role in this kind of thing that you've just described? I mean,
the UN plays a support role to the government. The government leads. As a member states organization, this is what the Secretary General is trying to do, is make sure that the United Nations deliver as one towards the development plans of a country. So for example, in Kenya,
tell us what
all 23 UN agencies have lined up together to come up with what is called a United Nations Development Assistance Framework to support Kenya's development. And that's from 2018 to 2022. It's a $1.9 billion framework.
Wow.
Focused towards President Kenyatta's Big Four agenda, focused on affordable housing, focused on universal health coverage, focused on agriculture and food security and manufacturing.
When you say 1.9 billion, is that cold hard cash? Or is
well, that is the kind of
technical
assistance, that is what we are marshalling in support of the government. It could be more, but the idea is this is what we expect all of us collectively to come together in terms of resource mobilization in support of the government. So as I said, the role of the United Nations family is to come together, coalesce, deliver as one, and be fit for purpose precisely for the needs of the government and the people of the country. This is what the UN Development Assistance Framework of Kenya is intending to do.
And you've been very passionate about a number of issues, universal health. You told me that it makes such an incredible difference. Girl power, this has been one of your key issues. I know you've been promoting peace and security up in the north. I was in Wajir, they were telling me what stuff you were doing up there. Bring us into, give us a bit of a feel as to what's your philosophy and what's the UN's philosophy and how you're impacting.
Let's take the Big Four. Let's take universal health coverage. I think it's perhaps one of the most courageous moves for the government of Kenya to have made and declared that it wants to achieve universal health coverage. As a matter of fact, we can achieve it in less than 3 years. We can achieve it as part of the legacy term of President Kenyatta. Why do I say that? Every year, year on year, 1 million Kenyans fall into poverty because of a catastrophic out-of-pocket health shock. And this is not just the poor. It's also the middle classes that get stuck in it. And therefore, you're forced into these harambees and all that. What we are saying is, let's focus on the preventative side so that less and less people get trapped into the curative side. Now, once you start focusing on the preventive side, it actually brings your healthcare costs exponentially lower. Look at a country like Singapore, which was malaria endemic, cholera endemic, has freed itself of all these diseases. It doesn't happen there. Few things like immunization can actually prevent close to 30 diseases happening. So I think it's an important call to action on universal health coverage, and I applaud the President, his vision on this, and our Cabinet Secretary for Health, Cecily Kariki, is absolutely stoic in her determination to see that this happens. So I've seen a congruence of the governors, of the leadership coming together. Second is agriculture. Now, just back on health for 1 second, if we are smart, the healthcare business in Africa is going to be $300 billion worth by 2030. Now, that is something to think about.
That's huge.
It's huge. Yeah. Second is agriculture. Agro-business in Africa is going to be $1 trillion worth. If you look at the Green Revolution in India, which started in the late 60s, thanks to Lyndon Johnson and the US president then saying we need to fight famine in India like we are fighting a war, and that time they were fighting the war in Vietnam. Look at some of the moves that they made in order to make sure that India, with a population of 1.35 billion, became food surplus. I think Kenya can show the way to the rest of Africa through the integration of big data, technology, and innovation to leapfrog agribusiness. And if we can do that, not only will we make sure that Kenya is food secure, but perhaps establish a blueprint for the rest of Africa. Because again, in 11 years, this is a $1 trillion business. Kenya can lead the way. The third is affordable housing. You know, Ali, Kenya is a country of innovation. It's a country of technology. It just doesn't break world records on marathon runs, but it does many other things. And it's got perhaps one of the most well-developed human capital. Who would have thought an M-Pesa would be so successful that today Kenya is #2 after Sweden globally in terms of cashless transaction? Why do I say that we need innovation there? Every day, from the time you woke up this morning, by the time you go to bed, 3,000 Kenyans have been born.
Yes.
Which is
3,000 a day.
3,000 a day, and which is about 1.2 million a year. If we are talking about 500,000 affordable housing, it does, the supply and demand aspect do not keep up. Today in Western Europe and parts of the world, they're already doing 3D printed houses which get built up in 8 hours, and a family of 5 can move into a house, which is probably at about $15,000 to $20,000. Imagine if we were to build 5 million or 10 million such houses. You will not be cutting the environment, you will not be cutting the trees, you will not be pulling out the sand from the rivers. You get prefabricated material, and you actually get houses out there that you actually provide what the President of Kenya envisions. The dignity of a household. So I think the sky is the limit. And if you look at manufacturing, today the blue economy and the green economy allows Kenya a pole position in terms of moving forward in this arena. The blue economy, as Ambassador Macharia, the Principal Secretary of the Foreign Affairs, says that this could be a $5 trillion industry within the next 5 years. So what you've started is fantastic, and it is not the way the Asian tigers have evolved or Western Europe has evolved. I believe Kenya and Sub-Saharan Africa, which probably will have a double-digit economic growth, can actually now show the way of how to leapfrog this. And that leapfrogging is, as I go back to it, is technology and innovation. But 3 things underpin this. Number 1 is political will, which we are seeing. And that needs to be sustained for the next 5 to 10 years. Second is the right public policies. Now, Kenya has moved from 135 in the ease of doing business to 61. What we need to get Kenya to is in the top 20 positions. That is where the critical mass is going to be. It is not about going out there and seeking more loans. It is going on there and getting more foreign direct investments. It is about more public-private partnerships, scalable public-private partnerships. And the last one is partnerships. And that is where the change is going to happen. Unorthodox partnerships, such as what we are doing in universal health coverage, an SDG platform, which has close to 17 companies which have joined up. And there's a multi-partner trust fund jointly managed by the UN and the government of Kenya, has now been shown by the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation as a best practice. So Kenya is, is doing stuff which is groundbreaking, and if we can achieve scale, we, as I said, can establish a blueprint of development for the rest of Africa.
You've painted this very optimistic picture, really a leapfrog moment, a kind of eureka moment you're describing, right? Yes. That's what I'm getting from you.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I love it. Now my question is, do we have the money?
Right.
You've been touching on much more innovative financing instruments, PPP.
Right.
So tell us, because if you just look at social media, Sid, and I know you're active, you'll see everybody's become very, very pessimistic, 1 point. 2 point, they're not sure that we have the execution capacity. Tell us about that and the balance sheet from your perspective.
Debt is an issue Kenya is confronted with, without a doubt.
You're convinced?
Yeah,
yes.
It is. It is a problem. It is a challenge. We are close to $60 billion, and by 2022, we may hit $70 to $80 billion. The issue is, Kenya has moved into a middle-income country status, so which means it becomes less aid-worthy. The traditional kind of aid
you're not going to get so much
to more credit-worthy. But the trick lies in, as I said, in the public policy space. How do you make Kenya attractive as a destination? The projections are that between Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria are going to be the best future investment destinations. But in order to do that, you have to make certain fundamental changes, which includes make the ease of doing business easier.
Yes.
You will have to cut away the challenges of leakages through technology and bring technology into that space. I believe what the president has done with this clarion call on corruption is an important message, which is not just resonating in Kenya, but trust me, across the world, that he's taken it upon himself. The deputy president have come together with Mr. Odinga. I believe these three men can be trailblazers in the transformation of Kenya. It's an opportunity. And why do I sound optimistic? Is I come from a third world country myself, India, which is still moving the needle. What Kenya can actually show with a much smaller size population of about 46 million, that it can actually turn much faster than the juggernaut of India can in that sense. So I believe the opportunities that we have, I think the whole aspect of devolution is a miracle. I mean, the speed with which this devolution has happened in this country is admirable on all counts. I believe you've got a group of governors who have the right leadership, who have the right skills, who need to make it happen. The issue is the threat of the sword of Damocles must hang. There must be zero corruption and zero tolerance to it. I believe in that sense, this country has already started moving in the right direction. Don't forget, including a country like South Korea, when it evolved out of the ashes of tragedy of the Korean War, also had its share of challenges. Fundamentally, I would still come back to an important issue. And you talked about gender, and I link it to that. I commend the First Lady for her Beyond Zero campaign and the fact that she's really put the issue of gender, the issue of maternal health, the issue of gender rights from the periphery of our consciousness into the center. And this is why it's going to make a difference. When a woman can decide when and how many children she wants to have, she then becomes a productive member of the family in the workforce. Don't forget, it is the dual income that starts to change the microeconomic picture at a household level. So when they both earn, she can plan her family, and therefore there is more disposable income, and therefore there is improved education, nutrition, opportunities for the child, and therefore you start to generate a human capital which takes the country forward. This is what happened in Western Europe post Second World War. This is what happened with the Asian tigers. I believe Kenya can really show the way. And what is interesting is 25 years after Cairo, or the International Conference for Population and Development, do you know where that conference is coming? To Nairobi, Kenya, in November. In November, the world is coming together in Kenya to safeguard.
Is it a UN-based conference?
It is a UN plus member states-based conference. So after it happened in Cairo in 1994, which was about emancipating women in terms of the decisions that they could take regarding their own body, we are actually seeing a lot of that rolling back in many countries, conservative politics, conservative religion. But Kenya is actually showing the way and is actually overcoming certain mental, religious and cultural barriers to go in that direction. And I just feel privileged that I'm actually serving in a country which is now going to be the home base for this next conference, which is happening after 25 years. We will define the future of human development here, the future of reaping a demographic dividend right here.
Let me come to this demographic dividend. I know you co-authored an article with former President John Mahama, who was a guest on my show, Mind Speak Like Yourself.
I see.
And you're talking about 830 million youth by 2050, a promise or a peril. Every economist says this is a demographic dividend. But let's have a look at Khartoum. It's a demographic terminator. Let's have a look at Algeria. It's a demographic. And what I would push back and say, what we're watching is a very fluid situation in Africa where this demographic dividend has now got expectations of its leadership, and how do you characterize that? Is it purely a dividend, or do you think I mean, if we don't get jobs, Sid, what happens?
You're absolutely right. The dividend will be when you have employed youth. Today, 1 million Kenyans are joining the workforce, and we are creating between 100 to 150,000 new jobs. This is going to be the pattern for the next 10 years. There are 35,000 young Africans looking for work every 24 hours. This is going to be the pattern for the next 10 to 20 years. There are 10 to 12 million Africans looking for work every year. What do we do? This is where the Marshall Plan of employment comes into play.
Yes.
This is where Western Europe, the Asian tigers, can actually look at Africa as an investment destination. Now, those figures I was giving you for agriculture or health and affordable housing were not pulled out of a hat, or I did not look at a crystal ball and predict it. It's really a fact. These are projections given.
You got a little black box over there.
These are projections given by the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank. Ali, I can't tell you why I feel a sense of optimism. I've worked in this country for 5 years, first as the head of the UN Population Fund in these remote counties of Mandera, Wajir, Marsabit, Garissa, Lamu, Isiolo, where the maternal mortality rates of just these 6 counties were perhaps one of the highest in the world.
But there's been a significant, you moved the dial there.
I haven't. The government has.
Yes.
The county government has. The political will has. We were just partners in making that happen. Now, when that kind of vision is there, it's absolutely possible. What is needed is for the African youth have to have the dignity of labor. Today, you'll have a lot of graduates out there. We don't have very many plumbers. Actually, a plumber in Western Europe tends to make more money than a doctor.
They used to make a lot of money, those Polish plumbers.
But that is why we need to have the dignity of labor should be a clarion call, and that the issue of technical vocational skills needs to be reinforced. But the future of jobs is going to be the agribusiness sector. The future of jobs is going to be the blue economy. The future of jobs is going to be the infrastructure sector. I don't see that as a problem. What it needs to happen is these big ticket item public-private partnerships, not an isolated project being done in Meru and another project being done in Isiolo. No, we need to look at scale. So I think the frontier counties, for example, have organized themselves as an economic block of 10 counties.
And what would you be doing there, for example?
Well, if we can go to scale around health, around the Big Four agenda, bring in more and more investors, which is why this public-private partnership has been forged with the government. In fact, the Kenya model is being looked at by many other UN country teams elsewhere. The most important thing is the legislative changes that need to happen. That for whether it's a Chinese business or it's an American business or it's an English business or it's an Indian company needs to come here, they should be able to do that. But once they do that, you need to twin them with the local companies so that we give a push to the development of the local private sector, which I would say by and large in Kenya is pretty well developed and has done quite well. So, you know, to me, the opportunity is there. And I think what the country is doing, having the handshake which has happened, which is again another very commendable thing, it's brought political stability, which is very, very crucial for bringing in investor confidence. But what I am trying to do with the UN country team is to be working at the public-private space and providing a certain risk mitigation by the presence of us and providing all the possible technical assistance and capacities that we need to at the county level. So, as I said, if we get this right, Kenya can actually be a blueprint for the rest of Africa to emulate.
Let me come to another question. This is around, you know, you're a former Special Forces officer. I wasn't joking, I was being serious. You've been on the front lines of combating violent extremism and terrorism, and I know you've been working hard on that issue. Here, of course, in Kenya, we've seen a number of events. You know, latest one was the event at the Dusit. What is your thinking around that? Is this a poverty thing? Or is this, you know, what exactly, how do you read it? You've got this experience, you've been looking at the Horn of Africa all these years. Tell us what you've learned.
So, Ali, violent extremism is multifaceted and it needs a very multifaceted approach. A securitized approach has never defeated a violent extremism movement anywhere in the world. I come from one of the largest armies in the world, and you know, we've been fighting in different parts of India, counterinsurgency movement, and as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, if the might of power could win it, well, these things would have been quashed a long time ago. The thing is that there has to be the narrative of prevention, the narrative of development, precisely what the Secretary General is talking about. What we need to be looking at is the whole triple nexus of peace, security and development, bringing that into the face. It's not just about rich young men getting influenced into that kind of image. It's also the foot soldiers who go and fall to the blandishments of the terror groups. If you see the pattern, if you look at this report by UNDP on the journey to violent extremism, one of the major drivers are poverty. One of the major drivers is lack of opportunity. It is also about marginalization. I'm not ruling out the other issues that accompany it. But as I said, we have to win on multiple fronts. But the most important thing is, how do we generate those opportunities for young people not to feel excluded, not to feel marginalized, not to feel left out of the development curve? Let me tell you what Kenya is doing. You've only seen Dusit and perhaps Garissa and a few others.
Yes.
It's the number of attacks it's actually prevented from happening.
Yes.
And that has happened.
And we never find out about it.
Exactly. And that has happened not only because of the effectiveness of the Kenyan Defence Forces, but it has also been the effectiveness of the primacy of politics in terms of the prevention agenda. So as I said, it needs a multifaceted approach, and that is why Kenya, again, was picked by the UN for the hosting of a conference in July. The Prevention of Violent Extremism Africa-wide regional conference will be held here in Nairobi to discuss violent extremism and counter-terrorism. It will bring a swath of different interlocutors from Ministry of Interior to Ministers of Development, bring them all together and come up with something which is far more strategic in terms of the prevention agenda. Because otherwise, you know, the sledgehammer of violence, it becomes like the Newton's third law of motion, and gradually, you know, it kind of, every act of violence has a revenge which accompanies it. I've seen it as a former soldier, and I can tell you one thing, that the primacy of politics must always be maintained. The sacredness of dialogue must always be maintained. The prevention agenda must always be maintained. I'm not ruling out the security component. It's important, but the other avenue is something which I think Kenya can show the way in.
You know, we're a business show. You're sitting there spanning all aspects of our economy. What are the opportunities that you would tell our listeners to go and have a look at and try and think of if they were going to make investments or they were going to invest their savings? What do you think? Agro-processing, is that your number one choice?
I would say the Big Four gives a huge opportunity. I mean, if I had the capital and I had the business acumen, I positively would have gone into agriculture and health quite immediately.
Yes.
In fact, that is why major private sector companies are coming into this space. You make the ease of business doing easier. You make it much more business friendly. Let me tell you, this is what big companies, the private sector is able to bring, is the big data, is the technology and the innovation. To me, all four offer a huge investment opportunity. It's a direction given by the leadership of this country. Get behind it, because that is where there'll be maximum opportunities. The most important thing is make it easier for these companies to come and work in this sphere.
You've said that for the second time. Do you feel that it's not as easy as it should be?
It isn't.
It is.
So that is why we are at 61. The World Bank has said it is at 61.
Yeah.
But I think the promise in the horizon is that the speed with which it has come from 135 has been quite incredible. It is now the public policy push that we need to do in order to come up to that higher level.
You've been in Africa a long time. You're in South Sudan. You've been here in Kenya. Tell us a little bit about how you're reading the current landscape on the continent whilst we finish off. I mean, we've seen pretty seismic developments in Khartoum, in Algiers. We've seen some friction between old leadership and new leadership. How do you characterize this moment on the continent? I understand you're talking about this enormous opportunity. Is it Kenya specific, or are you saying it's across the board?
If you look at the pattern of what's happening in the northern parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it is dramatic.
Yes.
The changes, seismic changes which have happened in terms of relations between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which
was a big deal.
Which the Secretary General of the United Nations calls the winds of hope.
Yeah.
We've seen a cross-border program between Kenya and Ethiopia actually being called a global best practice by the University of Japan. The signing of the Africa-wide free trade agreement.
Yes, are you bullish about that?
Absolutely bullish. I mean, this is the future.
Yeah.
Actually, now we are reaching the threshold of the 34 countries, and I commend the leadership of Rwanda and Kenya and Ethiopia that all helped to bring this together. Between Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, South Africa, Sudan, we'll probably see about 500 to 600 million people by 2050. But these will be economies which will be double-digit growth as well. The growth potential will be in sub-Saharan Africa, also because of geography, particularly because of the sea. The blue economy opens up opportunities, the trading with the Indian Ocean, the trading that will take place. So in my view, the opportunities of South-South collaboration between Kenya and these countries.
Are you seeing more of that where you're sitting?
It is, very much so. I think there's much more South-South cooperation which is taking place.
And do you think it's made a difference to policy making?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the big business idea is actually out there. But Kenya also needs to make sure, and these countries need to make sure that you get the best of the West and the East to come in together and blend here, which we are seeing in many ways, whether it's the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which is already making a dramatic change in terms of the infrastructure landscape, the technology landscape that can come in from the West, the major players from the US, etc., that can come into the manufacturing space. You know, Ali, frankly, the sky is the limit for this country.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you.
The sky is the limit. Pleasure having you on today, Sid. Thank you so much for making time and coming through the traffic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's Sid Chatterjee, and really outlining what is a very bullish case for the continent, one that we all hope unfolds. And thank you very much, Sid, for being our guest today. This was Metropole TV. This was The Smart Investor. My name is Aly Khan Satchu. You can find us here 8 to 9 p.m. every evening during the week. It's been a real pleasure being with you this evening.